We have got a packed house. Thrilled to see that. Well, you guys, thank you for joining us on what is our second to last home and school parenting meeting of the year. My name is Katie Lieberman. I am a parent here, also on the board of the Home and School Association, and also a psychotherapist. I'm thrilled here to welcome an esteemed colleague of mine here today, and I will get to that in just a moment. Before we go ahead and get started, of course, I think many of you see we have coffee in the back. At any point, feel free to slip out if you need to. We're going to have some time for Q&A at the end, so for those that can stay and have a question, we will make sure we have time for that. We have one more home and school parenting forum coming up that I want to just alert everybody as to what that's going to be. It is going to be on April 19th, and we are going to have a panel here, a panel discussion here to talk about growth mindset. If you all are not familiar with that concept, come anyway, and you will learn all about it. If you are, we promise to have a really interesting discussion. We are going to have educators here talking about how the growth mindset concept is in play here at Rowland Hall and how teachers are working to support students in nurturing and fostering a growth mindset. We are going to have coaches here from Romark to talk about how growth mindset plays out in the field of play and in athletics. And we are going to have hear people talking, such as Chuck, myself, talking about how you can foster growth mindset at home with the parenting techniques and skills that you utilize. So this is all based on the research by Carol Dweck. If you want a little heads up prior to coming, and really across the board she's really seen as revolutionary for her research and the concepts that she's developed around transforming from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. So we ensure that will be a great opportunity to have an important discussion. So we hope you'll mark your calendars for that in April. There will be information on FAQs and posters as well. So for today, I'm going to allow Nick to do most of the introduction himself, but I will let you know that Nick Sondes is a psychotherapist specializing in kids, adolescents, and of course family and parenting support in the community. He's an invaluable resource. He sees and works with many families already at Rowland Hall, and he is a fabulous person for us to know about for additional support in nurturing and raising our own children. So without further ado, I warmly welcome Nick Sondes.
Thank you. Usually, I think this is my fourth maybe presentation at Rowland Hall, and usually when I come there's like a table in the middle, so I have my visualization is now blown out of the water. There's like people are recording it. The pressure is definitely on. This is definitely the most people I've had. So I appreciate you all coming out today. So again, I'm Nick Sondes. I'm a child and family therapist in private practice, and today I'm going to be talking about anxiety. So the title of my presentation is "The Tug of War with Anxiety." Why would I call it a tug of war? Any ideas about why I would say anxiety is something like a kind of like a tug of war? I don't know why I would give it that description. No one's gonna vote. Oh, it's gonna be a hard crowd to start calling on people.
That is anxiety.
So yeah. What's that?
That is anxiety. It's like a war.
Right. It's sort of like, if there's a pit in the middle, and I always tell kids it's like there's an anxiety monster on the other side, and you're pulling and pulling and pulling, and you can't sort of win the battle. And it also brings up this question of, is anxiety something we can get rid of? Maybe we think anxiety is something we can just eradicate completely. Right. It's not something we can get rid of. So how do we learn to sort of live with anxiety, and how do we help our kids through it, both in anxious moments or also if they just tend to be more anxious in general? So we'll go through all of that today. A little bit about me. Clicker not working? Maybe that'll work. I'll just do it over there. So I'm a parent. I'm on this parenting journey with you all. I have 3 children, and of course it's the age of selfies. My daughter took this selfie, of course, with my 2 younger. So I have a 10-year-old daughter, almost 11, an 8-year-old boy, almost 9, and a 3-year-old will be born in July. So that's my family. I'm on this parenting journey with all of you. I tell everyone that. I don't consider myself a parenting expert. I make lots and lots and lots of parenting mistakes, I can assure you, and I'd like to joke about those. So let's get started. What exactly is anxiety? How are we going to define what it is? What are your ideas? What comes to mind? What are your associations when we talk about anxiety? Yeah?
Unreasonable fear.
Unreasonable fear. Good. Okay.
Debilitating.
Debilitating. Anxiety certainly can be, yes.
Repetitive thoughts.
Repetitive thoughts. Okay. What else? So
Sometimes
we think
irrational.
irrational. Someone say irrational. Yeah.
Subconscious as well. We don't always realize that.
We don't always know what you're anxious. You know, sometimes we don't realize what we're anxious about, right? We just suddenly feel anxious, and we have to kind of find. So to make a distinction, and the way we're going to focus on it today is that anxiety is really the body's response to perceived danger, right? It's the way that we perceive danger. Fear is immediate danger. If something's happening right now, we'll all be fearful. But the thing about anxiety is it's really, in terms of the brain, processed the same way, almost the same way as fear, right? But anxiety is really about perceived danger. So it's your mind fast forwarding to something in the future and worrying about it. Okay, so fear is really something that's natural, it's adaptive, it's an immediate response to a stimulus, but anxiety is really about projecting into the future. It's the mind doing guesswork, essentially, about something that could happen. It's making a mountain out of a molehill, right? That's the one I was here. So that's really how we're going to define anxiety today. Now, some people would say, of course, we can't get rid of anxiety. Some people would also say, is anxiety something that can be good? Who thinks anxiety can sometimes be good or necessary? Yeah, what do you think?
I think it sort of it primes you. If you're thinking about something, you're worrying about it, you might find something that is important.
Yeah, maybe sometimes we need a little bit of anxiety, or some people almost want to call it friendly anxiety. I don't know about you, but I think anxiety is exceptionally uncomfortable. Sort of one of the most uncomfortable things, right? So it's like, I don't really like the term, the sort of friendly anxiety, or some people get anxiety mixed up with intuition. We're not talking about those kind of things today. We're talking about what a lot of you said, which is that kind of more irrational kind of anxiety that can be problematic and get in the way of functioning. Questions about that? About my definition? Okay. Our goals for today will be to, 1, develop just a working understanding of anxiety in children. So how does anxiety work in kids? I think one of the things to think about with anxiety, and one of the ways that I think about it and look at it, is when you're in an anxious state and you're kind of stuck in anxiety, and the ways to get out of it, I think about it as a failure of imagination, right? Some people talk about mental health concerns in a big picture of, do we have a failure of imagination? So how do we use our imaginations and creativity to help get out of anxiety? And that's part of my focus today, is how do we help kids really work with their creativity and their imagination, metaphor, to work out of anxiety. And I'll give you some examples of that. We're going to talk about how to talk to your child about anxieties, how do you communicate with them directly. We'll talk about how to talk to them about the mind portion of anxiety, how kids can work with their own mind, how they can work with their body. So we have to include all these things in anxiety, because some kids, anxiety comes right through their thoughts, some kids' anxiety starts with their body. We're going to talk about how to work with both of those and kind of how to put it all together, and hopefully we'll give you some really practical strategies for how to deal with anxiety, and hopefully kind of come up with some of our own, okay? And hopefully by the end, you'll feel like you're a worrying wise parent. You know what to do when your kids are worried and how to manage when those things come up, okay? All right. Question, is anxiety getting worse? What do you think? Just in general. Is anxiety getting worse? Tell me why you think anxiety is getting worse. Social media, I knew that was going to be the first one. Like, social media is making, and I think that's probably true. Why do you think social media is making anxiety worse? Well, we know the depression sort of studies and things that are coming out of Facebook, and it's everyone's greatest hits, right, are on Facebook, right? And so it becomes this comparative thing that can cause some depression or anxiety. What else?
The world has become an incredibly fast and busy place.
Very fast-paced, very fast-paced, yes. So, incredibly fast-paced, we get information immediately, and we get a lot more, I would say, a lot more information than maybe we used to. It's sort of this idea about the number of kids who are now walking to school. Everyone's heard these sort of statistics. You know, the kids that are walking to school now, it's decreased sort of exponentially since when we were kids, because everyone thinks that we're really not safe. Do you know if that's true? Are we less safe? It's not true, right? In fact, in some ways, we're probably more safe. The statistics about crime, kidnapping, all those things really have not gone up, but our information about them have, so it's made us more anxious. So yes, I would say, thank you, that we're more anxious, and that anxiety is really, I would say, probably the primary sort of mental health referral concern. And some estimates as high as 20%. And I would say that overall, yes, I agree that we're probably more anxious. The other thing is, with immediate information, we're also hearing a lot more, and I get a lot of questions from parents about, how do I talk to my child about natural disasters? How do I talk to my child about school shootings? How do I talk to my child about all these things that are really difficult, that are so accessible now and just come across immediately in media?
I think the bar really is set higher for our children than it was for us. I don't think it's just more information. I think we are asking more of our children generally than was asked of us.
In what ways do you mean?
Well, at its most simple level, you know, what does it take to get into a great university?
Sure.
Back then.
More competitive maybe, yeah, for sure.
I was just having this conversation this morning. The things that we all have our kids involved in, I mean, come on, like none of us had our kids.
Right.
This over-scheduling of American
Reading
kids, right?
after
This is the thing,
school,
yes.
or and the pressure to do really well at them and do your studies. I mean, it's
Right.
crazy.
Right. Yes, I agree. Okay. So moving along, what are the symptoms of anxiety? We're going to spend a lot of time on this. Some of you already said it. Some people already said repetitive thoughts, demonstrating sort of distress that's out of proportion or irrational. Kids who are easily distressed, agitated in any kind of stressful situation. We see a lot of somatic complaints, headaches, stomach aches, those kinds of things that come up with anxiety in any of us. Lots of anticipatory anxiety, worrying hours, days, weeks ahead of things. I get this from parents all the time. Should I tell my child that we're doing A, B, or C? Like, when's the sweet spot to tell them? So if I tell them too early, they'll worry about it for days. If I tell them too late, they'll be freaked out they didn't get to worry about it enough. So what's the right answer? You know, it's a little hard to know. How do we sort of find the kids who are overly, self-critical, perfectionistic, over-responsible, very people-pleasing, unnecessarily apologizing. And then we, of course, see school avoidance, disruptions in family functioning, that kind of thing. So again, just kind of a list of basically what we're talking about in terms of the symptoms of anxiety. Okay, let's look at the differences between anxiety that's just sort of transitory, something that would just happen that's a response to a regular stressor, like a life change or something, like a move or whatever the case may be. So you think the fears and concerns are reasonable. They're just really kind of expected. It's what you would expect your child to sort of go through. You also have confidence that your child's going to adapt and adjust. Your child's responsive to suggestions for any to change. Your child might have questions, but the child accepts those answers. Whereas an anxious child, and we all know this when you work with anxious kids, reassurance really is never enough. If you ever have a child who's really anxious, you know that when you try to reassure them, it doesn't really seem to make a difference or to really gain any traction. Child learns to take responsibility for mistakes and oversight. So again, how does a child deal with mistakes? Can a child make a mistake, maybe get a bad grade on a test? Can they sort of move through that and not get stuck? And then again, you would expect that with transitory anxiety that those symptoms just diminish over time. That they get better, and you can see it, you can observe it. Whereas with anxiety that's concerning, they increase over intensity, and they take on a life of their own and just continue and continue and continue with sort of no relief. Questions about that? Ask questions freely, by the way. Okay, what causes anxiety? Anybody, this is the big questions. Anybody know sort of what's that? What are your thoughts on just what causes anxiety? Is it nature? What do you think?
Peer pressure.
Who thinks nature causes anxiety, meaning it's genetics? Partly genetics. Okay. Yeah. Nurture means parenting and the family environment. Who thinks it is caused by a family environment? Everybody's like, absolutely not. Yes, it's the mother's fault. So says the father in the So really, our understanding of anxiety comes from the interaction with a variety of factors. Would be one, genetics and just brain physiology. And really, in some ways, the brain physiology stuff is getting more and more interesting. And in some ways, I don't know if you'd agree, or if there's other clinicians in the room, mental health is really going in this kind of interesting direction right now where really what we're starting to look at is getting a little bit more specific with the sort of this evolution of the functional MRI. What we can sort of do now is that people are doing a lot of brain scans and they're saying, well, if you're going to diagnose me with anxiety, I want to see it. I want to see that my basal ganglia and my amygdala are sort of more active, or I want to, if I'm depressed, I actually want to see it. I want to know that that's true based on how my brain's functioning. And so we're kind of going in that direction, which is really kind of fascinating because I don't know if we'll be able to see these things other than just behavioral symptoms. Yeah.
So if you do one of these functional or whatever you call it, MRIs with somebody who has anxiety, like literally you do see it. There are
there's places in there.
What are they called?
The places, it's the functional. What are they called and where to do it? Well, at the end of today, I'll have to know. Right. There's not that. I mean, really, I think it's a kind of a new thing, and we'll see how sort of that goes in terms of. But there are people that are sort of doing that. I think that's the way things are really going. I'm sure the universities, clinics there, and things like that. Major universities are doing that, studies and things like that. And there's a few very specialized clinics that are looking specifically at neurology and being able to show people, where their brains overactive or that sort of thing. So our understanding really comes from, again, multiple factors: genetics, brain physiology, temperament, environmental factors, including stressful events, and then parenting style. Now I know the last one just kind of freak everyone out, and so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. What do I mean by temperament? I want to take a shot at what I mean by temperament. That's the difference of sort of brain physiology. Temperament's just, go ahead.
Just your general disposition.
Yeah, just a general disposition. You talk to some parents who say, I'm not surprised that my child is anxious because I think they were anxious as a baby. Now, we wouldn't really attribute anxiety to a baby, but we would say that maybe they tend to be really aroused a little bit more. They tend to be a little bit harder to soothe. Certain things that may make them a little bit more later on, and there's some studies about that predisposed to anxiety. Environmental factors that I'm really talking about are issues related to trauma, and we know kids that have experienced trauma and things like that tend to be at a higher risk for anxiety. All right, let's talk about this parenting style kind of issue. Parenting behaviors associated with anxiety in children. Now, the other thing about these studies I'm going to tell you about with the parenting stuff, this is done at Johns Hopkins. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. So you have to think about causality a little bit here. So we're not necessarily saying that the parents were this way and they made anxious children. It could also be that the children were a little more anxious and so the parents responded in this way. Does that make sense? And so we don't know for sure, but these are just sort of correlations. And you can look them over and say, what does this kind of look like for me? So parental over-control, intrusive parenting, really exerting control in conversation, really limiting a child's autonomy. Recently I've seen some kids who have selective mutism. You may be, when a child just won't speak. And a lot of times the first intervention you do with kids won't speak is you kind of watch the interaction with their parents and you find out that their parents are speaking for them a lot. They're answering sort of questions, ordering from at the restaurant, all these sort of things. And so I'm not saying that's a parental over-control, but it's just an example of, sort of how do you limit a child's autonomy or independence. We'll talk about that more today. Overprotection, excessive caution, protective behaviors, not necessarily with cause. Modeling of anxious interpretation. So agreeing with the child's distortion of risk in a situation. Anybody think of good examples of friends? None of your stuff. Anyone have an example of that? It's like the child who's afraid of, you think of anything, you know, I can't go on a roller coaster, I'm much too afraid, and if the parent says, oh, you know, I agree. That's far too scary. I agree. You probably should. You probably should. I'm not going for the high dive. No, I don't think that's a good idea. You know, tolerance or encouragement of avoidant behavior. It's one of the tricks with anxiety is kids really want to avoid once they're anxious, right? They want to avoid situations, and you can't sort of play into always having them avoid situations. Rejection or criticism, disapproving or being overly critical. Conflict is not a strongest factor, but I would say clinically, I would say that if there's, you know, more sort of discord in the home, it tends to make the children anxious. I think we all kind of know that. That makes sense to us. Parenting behaviors that buffer stress. So the rewarding of coping behavior. So focusing on means, not ends. So you got a bad grade on your test, but I know you studied for it, I know that you really worked hard, I saw you working hard, and you know, it didn't turn out the way you wanted to this time, but like I said, we're focusing on the means and the studying and what went well. Extinguishing excessive anxious behavior. So not responding to anxiety in your child excessively. Right? I think of examples of that. It's kind of like your child comes home and says, well, you know, Susie wouldn't play with me today, and I'm so upset about it. And you just invited her to your birthday party. How could she leave you out? You know, sort of like. Oh, okay, all right. You know, how do we kind of not respond and try to be sort of neutral or kind of more in the middle? Managing our own anxiety, right? We all have plenty of our own anxiety. How do we kind of manage that when we work with our kids? That tends to be one of the more difficult ones, I think. Have an open house policy for positive communication and problem solving. So just more of an open communication style, and then more of a democratic parenting style. So authoritative, which means the parent's still in charge, but not an authoritarian kind of style where obedience and things like that is really what's demanded. Obviously, we know that tends to create more anxiety or having an overly permissive kind of style with no limits. We also know kids don't tend to feel sort of safe and contained in those situations either. Okay, we're going to get right into how to explain and talk to your child about worries. So sort of the meat of the presentation today. One of the things that we're going to focus on, and I'll make a point throughout, and to give you a little, so I'll give you a little example. So I've seen a little girl, and she is a third grader, and she started to develop a separation anxiety, and she would worry every single day that she got dropped off at school that her mom was not going to come pick her up. She was convinced her mom was absolutely not going to come pick her up. So she would have a hard time getting into school, she'd have a hard time during the school day, tears, worry, and that sort of thing. And so her mom said to her, well, I will be there every day to pick you up. I promise you I will be there. And what you should do, and she worked this out with the faculty, what you should do is right around pickup time, because her class looked out the window like this, right around pickup time, I want you just to go to the window and see if you can spot my car in the pickup line, and then you're going to feel better. That's going to help you feel better. What do you think of her? I mean, certainly, I'm no judgment, right? A very well-meaning parent, right? She wanted to help her child feel better, and she wanted to give her reassurance, right? So, are there any problems with that approach? Because we had to kind of do a different intervention. What's the problem with the approach that she took?
Transference of anxiety.
Partly that, yes, right? I mean, so partly that's a little bit of transfer anxiety and her being concerned about it, yeah.
Perhaps the child, even if the car was there, would kind of not see it, not recognize it's there.
Yeah. Maybe because she's just feeling too anxious?
Or she's just
very
Or she's so worried, it reinforces itself.
Yes, absolutely.
She anticipates it all day.
He anticipates the moment all day. Yes. Yeah.
What happens when she's late? The day she's late?
This is the tricky thing about anxiety. I'm going to talk about this. Can you guarantee that you're going to come, you're going to be here to take your child in today? We can't really guarantee it. We can say it's highly likely, and of course I'll be there, and barring anything, you know. So what we have to do in this case is, and the one thing I'll focus on is we're trying to remove anxiety from what I call an external locus of control, where all these things out here are responsible for my anxiety, into something internal. We have to help the child internalize their anxiety and get control here, because anxiety is about perception. We've already established that anxiety is about this reading into the future and about a perception issue, right? And help them move from something external to something more internal. So again, it's not about the child. This is the message to your child. It's not about your child. It's not about the situation. It's about the tricks that worry tends to play. Okay, and the way I like to do that, and that's, you probably know from my other presentations, is to talk to kids about their brains. And there's a lot of evidence now that says that if you can talk to people about their brains and the way their brain works, so by using the mind to help the brain, really weird concept. By using the mind to help the brain, you can help people become less anxious or work with a variety of different issues if they can understand the mechanisms that are at work and start to think about thinking, we'll talk about that in a minute, a little bit differently. Okay, so that's the take-home message. Not your child, it's not the situation, it's your worry brain, it's these tricks. So really, in the end of the day, are you helping, the way you communicate to your child, are you helping them feel more prepared for the situation or more scared? The other thing, how can I communicate with them in a way that helps them? Okay. The other thing that I just pointed out, is not to also tell your child not to worry. Oh, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Don't worry, it's going to be fine, because your child already has an image in their mind as a reference point, right? They already have an image of their mind of what's going to happen, and that's really what we have to work with. Again, it's this idea about imagination. How do we take this mountain that they're making and make it back into a molehill? How do we shrink that sort of down to size and work with it? So saying don't worry is sort of like, you know, there's this big bat in the room, but don't worry about it. It's just a bat, and bats, you know, it's sort of like, well, I'm kind of freaked out because there's a, you know. So this is what I'm saying, that they have an image in their mind already. So. Brain basics. The other thing I would tell you about anxiety is that we're going to do this idea about thinking because anxiety and thinking do not go together. When your amygdala in your brain is triggered, you are not supposed to be thinking. The example I give is if you're out in the forest or something going on a nice hike and you see a big grizzly bear come running out you don't think, gosh, that bear must be hungry. This poor bear is so angry at me. I wonder, are the cubs? You know, that's just not what you can't. Thinking will not help you, right? Because we know that the amygdala's job. Does anyone know what the amygdala's job is? Sort of like when anxiety is triggered. Fear. Fight or flight, or one more. Freeze. Good. Paralyzed. So fight, flight, or freeze is really what needs to happen. You need to run. You need to fight, or you need to hide. And that's really what that function is when we become anxious. And anxiety and thinking don't go together. So how do we bring thinking on board to help the child move through anxiety? So we know the brain is very complex, right? It's sort of like outer space. I mean, all these things we're learning about the brain, there's plenty of things about the brain that we still don't know. It's sort of this big, vast, you know, we're learning and learning more about it. So it's we also know it's changeable. The brain is plastic. We know that from a whole lot of studies. One of the ones I always point to is studies about trauma and child abuse. So they take pictures of kids' brains before, they do a particular course of therapy, and they take pictures of the brain after, and you see changes in the brain. Changes in what lights up, changes in the way that the brain looks with treatment. Okay, so we know that the brain is certainly changeable in a very basic way. So it's a big part of the last presentation I did. We talk about what I call, or what Dan Siegel, in terms of, this is from his book, The Whole Brain Child, calls the downstairs brain. The downstairs brain is responsible for fear, for anxiety, and for reactivity. And the upstairs brain, which is receptive and open and responsible for thinking and reflection and that sort of thing. So I like it because it's simple for kids. You can talk about the upstairs brain, the downstairs brain. If you're in your downstairs brain with anxiety, sometimes you can take the escalator up to the upstairs brain and get thinking on board. And again, how this is all, the brain can certainly also change through experience. So we're trying to give our kids a different experience of anxiety. This is just a little image of that, of the upstairs brain, the downstairs brain, and what's responsible for what. And again, we've talked about kind of the amygdala as the center of that, and what really gets triggered with anxiety. So the amygdala really has a one-size-fits-all policy. The amygdala says if there's any threat, it has the same response: fight, flight, freeze. Right? That's the same. It doesn't discriminate or differentiate when that happens. It's a round-the-clock security system. It's really not good at checking details. It's really not good about sort of, as it were, thinking things through. Just has one response. And if you think about, you know, this equipment we have, it used to be incredibly useful, right? Evolutionarily, is that what we're evolutionarily speaking, these functions in the brain used to be incredibly useful, right? You know, in terms of when we were really focused on survival, this had to be a much more powerful part of our brain. So, but we're now still stuck with the same system. We still have this, it's our first response system, anxiety, amygdala. It's the first thing that comes on board when we either are experiencing threat or danger or perceive it, okay? So again, we're looking at how we can change that by thinking, how do we bring thinking on board when anxiety is happening. So, first thing we have to do is always question worry, right? We can't give worry any sort of authority. Worry is really not something that's credible. It's not to be trusted because it always has this initial response to things, but it's not very good at fact-checking. So, one of the things we'll talk about today and here is sort of like, I always want you to think about asking questions first. How come? Right, it makes them think, right? Another kind of brings thinking on board. And most kids like to do things themselves. I think that's a pretty natural instinct. There's a study with 4-month-olds, and if you heard this study, where they had these 4-month-old babies, and they'd all have these kind of music things, and they pulled the string, and the music would go on. And if you would interfere with their ability to pull the music, and you would sort of, the research people would pull the music, babies would get upset and fussy. So even at 4 months old, you're like, I want to do it myself! You know, it's like, I want to, no, let me do it. You know, so part of asking questions is, how do we help, again, back to this idea of autonomy and independence, how do we help kids work through this themselves, right? Of course we want to rely on this when they're anxious, but how do we help them? So what is worry? What's worry telling you? Again, it's making it part of this worry brain. Or what's your worry brain telling you? What's worry really telling you? So give worry its own kind of voice. Is that what you really think? You know, I'm going to do horribly on this test. I just don't want to do horribly on this test. What's worry? You know, what's worry telling you? Is that what you really think? So a way to challenge it. What does another part of you know or think? Right? So we all have these sort of ideas about how you can compete with anxiety when it comes up. Do you think it's really true? Why or why not? Again, questions, and what do you think is more likely? So ways to sort of challenge anxiety and kids giving it authority. Questions up to this point?
I have one.
Yeah?
Just going back to the function of the brain,
Yeah.
and this may be a whole other forum, but when you throw puberty in there.
What's that?
Puberty, when you throw puberty in there. Because I see an anxious child who is now going through puberty, and it's a whole other bag of tricks.
Yeah, I would certainly. Right.
It's probably enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of development, certainly know that there are times that are more anxiety-provoking than others. Right, just in terms of development and sort of the bodily changes. I can't tell you the specifics about at this particular time the brain, you know, but certainly I think that's true. And we also know that there are particular periods of time where the brain's undergoing major sort of reconstruction. We know that about adolescence now in particular. You know, for a long time, Thank you, Katie. For a long time, the adolescent brain was really, I would say, misunderstood, and adolescents were misunderstood because we really didn't understand the brain functioning part of it. And now we know that their brains are going under such major, sort of reconstruction during that time that we have to think about, sort of the idea about the frontal lobe with adolescents. They can't sort of make, we want them to think about consequences, and they're sort of like, I can't think. It's not working for consequence. The brain is thinking about consequences is not sort of working in the same way. So I think probably another whole other form, but yeah.
Yeah. The logic part is a challenge.
The logic part?
Just the logical part of talking through it,
Yeah.
and because the emotion has taken over.
Right. So what does an anxiety equation look like? Okay, if we just look at anxiety, so in terms of doing the comparison. So anxiety equation looks like an overestimation of a threat. Or I'm thinking about something in the future, and I'm really overestimating the power that this threat will have, and I'm underestimating my ability to cope. Whatever it is, I don't think it's something that I'm going to be able to manage, which leads to a being stuck in an anxious response, right? As opposed to, if we're really going to take charge of anxiety, we're going to take charge of a worry brain, how do we shrink the fear? We're going to talk about that today. How do we shrink the fear by sort of fact-checking about whether or not what's happening, is it really correct? The way that does it really sort of meet the facts? And can we approach the situation in small steps eventually to gain mastery? Okay, how do we, and I'll give you some examples. We're gonna come back to this a lot today. It's from Tamar Chansky. A lot of these sort of pictures and things are from the book that I gave you at the end. It's from Tamar Chansky. It's called How to Free Your Child from Anxiety. I think it's probably the best book. It's the one I sort of give out and recommend all the time. So if you take a child who's afraid of a dog, right, and they become afraid of the dog for a variety of reasons. Maybe they were attacked by a dog, maybe they just are afraid of dogs, period. How do we help them go sort of up a sequence of stairs to gain mastery over being able to be around a dog? So it's like we think about the other equation. The other equation says that they're overestimating the threat of dogs, right? That they're overestimating and they're underestimating their ability of how can they cope with seeing a dog. So what's the starting point? Looking at a dog book with mom. Now that might not seem very anxiety-provoking, but for some kids it certainly can be. You look at a dog behind a fence, pet a neighbor's friendly dog, stand in front of the fence, spend 10 minutes outside in the yard, and a neighbor's dog's on a leash, and then kind of walk to school with mom, and eventually kind of walk to school with a friend and no longer be afraid of the dog. So again, how do we work with anxiety in small steps getting toward mastery? And we'll come back to sort of this stair-step kind of idea. This is the brain train. You hear a lot about in cognitive behavior therapy, thought, feeling, action, so I wanted to kind of bring that on board. But certainly some things, and field trips, it's interesting that this one was included here because I've treated a lot of kids who are totally freaked out by field trips. They really are they have this whole idea that field trips are like, that all sorts of things could happen on a field trip. And so, on a worry track, it's what if we get lost? What if there's an accident? What if someone throws up on the bus? Now, I don't know if you, and that tends to be, Katie's nodding, because I've also seen a lot of kids who the throw up thing is a really major kind of anxiety issue. And I've gone to great lengths to treat the throwing up problem. And one of the best tools is the fake puke that you get from like the magic stores or whatever the case may be. Sort of like, I have parents sort of put them around the house like, oh, there's fake puke. Or you have dad eat cereal and chew it up and be like, oh, I don't feel going to throw up in the sink, and the child's like, okay, it's not real. Oh, But again, it's an exposure, right? So it's what we call exposure. In anxiety terms, what we call little exposures, right? How do I get more comfortable with sort of this, with this idea? And again, so the thought can start with thoughts. Feeling is nervous, and then of course they say, I just want to stay home. I don't want to go on the field trip. I can't go on the field trip. I'm just going to stay home, right? That's always the behavior that's associated with it or the action. How do we change that and just get it on a different track? Through exposure, the way that we're talking about communicating, that's just your worry brain and a variety of other things we'll get to about how to, get them back on track. So now we're going to kind of enter into our conversation about the mind. Thinking about thinking. It's kind of an interesting concept, right? it's kind of how, this idea about how do we track our own thoughts. The only way to track your own thoughts is to think about thinking. And so it's also what we want to help our kids do, is for them to identify what is your worry mind really saying, what they're telling you is going to happen. Can't let worry have the last word, and also knowing just what are the tricks, what are the many tricks worry can play. So with a sort of non-anxious brain, I tend to say that thoughts just kind of fall through. A child may think, oh, what if we're going on a field trip and the bus gets in an accident? Well, buses don't really ever get in accidents. And, that hasn't happened before, so they just kind of move on. Doesn't mean they don't have the thought. They still may have an anxious thought. All of us have anxious thoughts. The difference is, do they pass through or do they get stuck? If you think about anxiety, people brought up repetitive thoughts, or you think about people, especially right before sleep. That's where I hear about it the most. People sit and what do? They sort of ruminate, right? They kind of spin through their day and they think, oh, I wonder if when I talked to her, she just thought, oh, what an idiot. Or whatever the case may be, right? I mean, you're just sort of running through this thing of how do I, and those thoughts tend to get stuck. And once they're stuck, they're very hard to get past. If you ever thought about being really anxious about something, it's very hard to get off your mind, right? Even if you think you're away from it, it's sort of, there it is again, and there it comes back, and you're like, So, little tricks, and again, these are about how to work with the mind and probably about how to communicate with your child. When you're estimating risk, go with facts, not feelings, right? That's just a message to give your child. Go with facts, not feelings. If you ask the right questions, you're helping to help your child access smarts about a situation that just feels scary. Again, back to this sort of questioning. How much of you feel scared something bad will happen? How much of you really believes it will happen? Again, there's this kind of split, right? About how much should we give credit to worry and how much, we always know that probably somewhere the child has access to another part of their mind, another part of their brain that says that things will be okay. Separating feelings from facts, and then just fact checking. So give me an example of something that you think is a common concern or a worry that comes up.
I'm going to do bad on my test tomorrow.
I'm going to do bad on my test tomorrow. So let's just think about it. How would you help a child fact check this idea about the test?
You usually don't do bad. You usually do well.
Or how do you usually do on tests? What was the grade on your last test? Right, questions about how do we get them to fact check, and how do we help facts be in charge and not let worry call the shots. So it's just one way of sort of dealing with anxiety when it comes up. Okay, I like this one. What's that? Yeah.
Oh, I was just saying, what if the facts are bad? Like, what if you're meant? So there's something to be said there about, like, if you could always as well on tests and they're still anxious, like, okay, maybe you can really think through that. Yeah. But if the facts are not good facts, like maybe they always fail, or maybe something actually bad is happening in their life, how do you help them process that piece?
Yeah. So if they've sort of failed every test. Maybe not. Yeah. That'd be a little rough. But if they haven't done very well in a particular subject, right? So then, what's the line of questioning? Anyone have ideas? What do you think?
Talk to the teacher.
No.
Could talk to the teacher, but let's think about the external locus of control, the internal. How can a child manage the internal part? Yeah.
Ask them if they've studied as much as they can.
Yeah, I think sometimes you're going back to the means parts. Like, do you feel like you've studied as much as you could? Do you feel like you need? Do you feel like you need more help? Do you think help would?
But I mean, like,
help you?
even outside the context of like tests, like, I mean, like, what if something bad in their life is happening? Like, and there's nothing. I mean, this isn't a matter of them studying or preparing. So I don't mean like in an academic context. Like, what if there's just bad stuff in their life?
Do you mean like trauma or just family discord or something like that? Okay, I'll come back.
I'll stand out. How about prayer?
Right, and actually, there's a lot of evidence to show that if people have a mantra in the face of anxiety and something else to sort of focus on, that it does help them.
I was just going to respond
to
Jen's comment that yes, there can be, right, in any life, at any given time really,
there are facts that aren't good, right?
Yeah.
And alongside them, there's usually more to the story also. So there could be, you know, X going on that's not so good, and if you say, okay, so maybe that is true, let's also look at what else is true about your life, or let's look at what else is going on, because often even alongside negative facts, there's something else to be found that's workable. Would you agree with that, Nick?
I would agree with that, but I also think you're saying that this is where I think anxiety gets super tricky, because I think some kids, you think, well, they have a lot of reasons to be anxious. You know, the world doesn't feel like a safe place to them, and the truth of the matter is, maybe for that child, the world is not exceptionally safe. You know, and so like exposure and things like that, or sort of this irrational anxiety, is kind of, it's more of a tricky subject, right? I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but again, how do we help? You know, I think it's almost a different. How do we help kids feel more safe? Because in that sense, you know, we're dealing with an issue that then is probably not so much about perception. A lot of what I'm talking about today really is perception, right? It's the child I'm treating who thinks mom's not going to come pick her up, but that's never happened, not even once. But if you're dealing with kids where really their day-to-day sort of existence is really at risk, then you think, well, they're dealing with a whole different kind of anxiety almost, because then it's not really perception, not that there's things you can't do. But, Chuck?
We do a little exercise with our 5th graders about thinking about middle school and talking about some of the stresses and anxiety they might feel about going to middle school. And there's given a checklist of all the things that they might feel anxious about. And then we talk about what they have control of, what they, steps they can take to lower the level of anxiety. So if you're worried about losing your locker combination, well, what could you do to address that? Or getting around the school, we'll have an opportunity to go look at the school and see about how we would get around. So focusing on those things that they do have control over.
Yeah. Help them. Still an internal locus of control, because there's things that they can do and ways that they can kind of even be creative or think about how they can take more control over situations. Yeah.
Yeah, go with facts, not feelings. I mean, that's very understandable to us sitting here. Presumably we're all calm and listening to you. When a kid or anybody you're in there amygdala.
Yeah.
How do you get them out of it? Because you can go through all facts you want, have them do it instead of you tell them.
Right.
Even so, they can't move out of that feeling. How do you get them up higher?
I think that, and I'm jumping ahead a little until you find, I'll answer the question now. I think for some kids, again, it's this 3-part thing. You have the mind, and you have the body, and then you have a way to put it together. And I think for some kids, the body part is so major, because I've certainly seen it where a child is so stuck in that amygdala sort of space that they're really almost, inconsolable, right? And how do we get them out of that space? One, I think it's not easy. The other thing that I think often works is you have to get them involved in an activity that's completely different from what they're doing. Some people want to say distraction, and I'll get to that in a little bit, and I don't advocate distraction at all. Because it just means, because I think distraction is momentary, and I think it's going to come back. So how do we get the brain from doing one thing to doing another thing? And for some kids, and I had a child who had a horrific anxiety attack, he was in my office yesterday, about a violin recital. A complete meltdown. The parents were so upset because the grandparents had come and they were like begging him, like, your grandparents are here. You're going to lose the Xbox for a year if you don't go. It wasn't. But so for him, the only thing that kind of helped him sort of get out of it, which sounds kind of strange, and sometimes parents need to have tools. It's like humor. One, how much can you use humor, right? So a competing emotion, which we'll talk about in a minute. For this kid, it's playing catch. Sounds really kind of strange, but it's like you have to get him out of this sort of one. You have to be like, catch this, and help them to be like, oh, I got to focus on like catching a ball, and I got to focus on. So you have to help them focus on something completely different than what they're doing. Something totally different as far as the body goes to get them out of that state of mind. I hope that answers part of your question. I'm going to come to a little bit more of it in a minute. Yeah.
Have you found that that's mostly like a physical activity rather than, say, reading or something more intellectual? But
Completely.
It's a body.
Yes. Even because a lot of kids advocate in my office for video games. I think when I'm anxious, I just need to play video games. I'm not sure that, because in terms of your mind, the physical activity, I don't think it's doing something different. And I think doing the physical activity is probably the most helpful thing. Another quick little trick and example is helping kids sort of, how do you sort brain mail? So we all know that sometimes you get junk mail, right? What do you do with junk mail? You shred it, and you throw it out, you just like, oh, you get all the junk mail or delete it on your email. So worry junk mail goes here because it's saying that something's urgent, it has to happen right now, and it's the first response, and this is what worry brain does. But then there's other things where you have to sort it and say, okay, well this is actually a real thought. How do I make the distinction between what sort of a real thought is and what's just kind of coming more from my worry brain that's junk mail, right? So again, I like metaphors and I like ways of talking to kids that are like this because I think it brings this imagination and thinking on board. And I think kids need metaphors and imagination and creativity to help them get out of those stuck places. So, worry brain says, and this is just a side-by-side, you're going to get lost. You're definitely you're going to go into this place. You're going to go to Lagoon, and you are going to get lost. And you're never going to see your parents again. That's what's going to happen. Right? That's what worry brain would make it very severe. How do we turn it into a question? How do we help the child turn it into a question? This is just a really quick trick. Am I really going to get lost? Do I really think, $1 million question, do you really think you're going to get lost? No, I'm going with Johnny's family, they'll stick with me and I'll stick with them, right? Facts, helping him exert some control over the situation. And again, partly facts checking. Okay? That's just another sort of trick of the side-by-side comparison. There's a whole bunch more, obviously. That's just two, and again, just in terms of time, those are just two quick sort of tips and tricks about how we help with the mind sort of portion of things. And of course, it's going to change developmentally depending on the age of the child. Working with the body and unplugging the alarm. So sometimes worry just bypasses thoughts. We talked about that, and some people know the feeling of sometimes you just suddenly, your body just feels anxious, and maybe you can't tie it to the thought, and you're not even sure why that is or what's happening. It's really what happens when we have increased heart rate, sweating, lightheadedness, stomach ache, all these sort of somatic responses. And this is when the amygdala sends a message straight to the body that says, danger is here, you have to act now. Right, that immediate sort of thing. And so the body's then on guard. Shallow breathing, all these sort of things that come on board. So, another just sort of metaphor, right? What's a good metaphor to give kids about? You might be uncomfortable at first, but eventually you sort of adjust as you get more exposure to something that makes you anxious. This is a swimming pool example, right? You've all been in a cold sort of pool. Eventually, first it's kind of cold, but eventually you'll kind of adjust. Same thing for the body. How do we help the body kind of adjust to whatever the anxiety-provoking situation might be? I use this one all the time. Kids know what it means to have their temperature taken, and a lot of times it's sort of like, we're just going to take we need to take an anxiety temperature. Right? So it's like, how anxious would you say your body feels right now? Some kids need to know where they feel anxious in their body. Some kids will tell you their head, some kids will tell you their chest, some kids will tell you their feet, some kids will tell you their fingers, some will say all of the above. And if that's what you're feeling, we take the anxiety temperature and they say, well, I'm at a 9, we'll have in a minute, how do we sort of bring them down to a place that's more sort of neutral between 1 and 5. So it's just another trick of communication with kids. Okay. Everybody has heard about deep breathing, and people usually are kind of sick about hearing about deep breathing. And most people are like, I think it's a bunch of junk. And I hear so many people say, it actually makes me more anxious when I do deep breathing. It makes me have a panic attack when I deep breathe. So, deep breathing turns out works, but it has to be done the right way. Does anyone know what the right way is when it says diaphragm breathing, right? Does everybody know what diaphragm breathing is? It's about a child in the office yesterday, and we were practicing. It's the same child that had the violin issue. So if you lay down, I can't recall if you lay down, too bad. If you lay down and you put a book on your stomach, the book has to go up and down. So if you all put your hand or a fist on your stomach, right? And if you take, and everyone just take a breath. Most of us, if I say take a breath, we go, and it kind of raises and goes in, but that's not a diaphragm breath. The diaphragm breath means that this fist has to go out. So you're almost like stretching these muscles here, and you're like pushing your belly out. That's the only kind of breath that will reduce anxiety, is diaphragm breathing, and it takes practice. How do we kind of build those relaxation muscles and help kids practice? And I tell kids, you have to practice when you're not anxious. Diaphragm breathing has to be something, if you have a really anxious child, that you do just like before bed, or as a function of practicing, say lifting weights or exercising or anything else. It's something you can practice. So when you do feel anxious, when you start to feel anxious and your anxiety temperature is at a 6, you can do diaphragm breathing and see if that doesn't help calm it down. There's also, or bring it down. There's also some who advocate for breath in terms of that you breathe in and hold, you breathe in what, 4 seconds, I think, and you kind of hold it for 3 and breathe out back down to 4. That sounds familiar?
Yeah.
I don't remember the number of times. Do you know how many times? 4 times?
Yeah.
That's the cycle?
Yeah, 4 times 4.
Yeah, 4 times 4. Yeah. So we'll talk to kids about that diaphragm breathing. It's a way of it's a way of trying to unplug the body's alarm system. Yeah.
And that is something that we teach here at, when I go into classes and talk about controlling. And there is an app that people might want to take a look at too, called Breathe to Relax. And then the letter to
Breathe to Relax.
And it talks, so you can learn all about diaphragmatic breathing and
nice.
Regulates.
Very good. Thanks, Joe. Yep, the second thing about making bodies less anxious, everyone knows about progressive muscle relaxation. It's a little harder with kids. It's where you tighten from like your toes up or from toes. You tighten the muscles and then release them, and then you try to tighten every muscle as it comes up and release it. As a way of getting the body sort of less anxious. We have the mind, we have the body. We also talked to, I think I've dealt some of this already, but how do we change anxious behavior? You have to be uncomfortable on purpose. There's really no way that I know to change anxiety without helping your child be a little bit systematically more and more uncomfortable on purpose. So it's taking worry on and saying, so practicing the things that worry says you can't do. Worry says you can't go on a field trip. Eventually, you're going to have to go on a field trip. You can't avoid, the field trip. Eventually, this child who's in my office yesterday, he will do a piano recital. No, I will help him do a piano recital. And unfortunately, this last one that happened, it was too severe that he ended up avoiding the piano recital, or the violin in this case. But we have to get to a point where he can actually do that, right? And take small steps with performing or things like that, performing in front of the class, performing with parents, performing in a small group, then a big group, to the point where he can do it. We have to really, create a amygdala-friendly kind of learning, which means that we have to get in that upstairs brain and create something that's that's more open, right? You have to be in this upstairs brain where you're more open, you're not downstairs, always perceiving and responding to threat. Lots of kids, we call it courage challenges. You have to take a courage challenge. We're going to make this one. This one's only going to be like on a 4, but it's this idea that you're going to stand behind the fence and kind of look at a dog. I mean, one that's been hard for me to treat recently, which is a really common fear and phobia, is the fear of thunderstorms. Afraid of thunderstorms? Some kids are really afraid of thunderstorms. I'm treating a girl right now who's really, really afraid of thunderstorms, but she came to me in the winter, and I'm like, well, how are we gonna make a thunderstorm here? So most of the time when we're in my office and we're doing art or painting stuff, I have playing as loudly as possible thunderstorm and lightning and all these sorts of things, and she keeps looking at me like, well, I know there's no, I know, but when there is one, you'll be happy that I was trying to help her do an exposure, right? Help her get used to it. Burning out your worry with a competing emotion. We talked about this a little bit. So it's this idea that you can't really be in 2 places emotionally, right? Humor and anxiety, they don't go together. They're not even from the same part of the brain. So if you're in a worry brain, you got to bring on another part of the brain. That can be humor. That can be the exercise I was talking about before. And the brain really, we know, can really, in some ways, can favor positive emotion over negative. It's really hard sometimes to stay humorous when your child's in the midst of an anxiety spell. But if you can bring humor on board, it can be of enormous value. I like it when kids get to the point of being annoyed with anxiety. Annoyance and anxiety are not part of the same part of the brain either. They just kind of get annoyed. They're like, oh, anxiety's back again. This is really kind of bugging me and annoying, but I feel like I'm in charge and I know what to do and I have tips and tricks in order to deal with it. And you've got to switch out of the emotional tone of just being stuck, in anxiety mode. So burning out worry with it. Think about what competing emotions can you introduce at a time when your child's struggling. Talked about this before, you can't just distract. I talked about it more as a dismissal. So for older kids, instead of like a worry brain, and some kids like to call it the protector brain. My protector brain was talking to me because my protector brain is saying, danger, danger, but my wise brain can tell me something different. I don't think simple distractions work. I just need to go do this, I need to go do that. I think you have to change the activity altogether. Older kids, teenagers that I see like to call it brain mistakes. I'm just having a brain mistake, my brain's kind of firing this mistake, and I just got to put it in the junk mail and say, you know, my worry brain can bring, or my wise brain can come on board and tell me something different through fact checking or whatever else. All right, the anxiety sort of master plan is just kind of breaking it down in small steps. So always emphasize with what your child's feeling, right? I'm not going to tell them not to worry. I'm not going to tell them that this is the silliest thing ever to be worried about and we can't believe that this ridiculous thing is coming again. Empathize with what they're feeling. Relabel the problem as worry brain. I think you always have to relabel it as something that's a different part of their brain, a brain mistake. However, whatever works for you and your child in terms of relabeling that and creating a different metaphor. Rethink and shrink worry down to size. We talked about some of that. What's a way to shrink worry down to size? Making a mountain into a molehill. Ideas?
Asking the questions.
Asking questions, right. Fact checking, giving metaphors. Have to get the body on board. I don't think you can just do one or the other. I think the body, you know, the way that works, you always have to do both. Approaching the worry on purpose and practice getting used to it. In her book, Smart Chances, which talks about PT exercises, which is whenever you talk to kids about, like, the roller coaster, and how freaked out they were the first time they rode it, and you say, well, what helped? They all give you the same response. Well, I just got used to it. So anxiety is sort of the same thing. How do we approach things, being functional on purpose, and get used to it? And then refocus on what you want to do. This part I like because it's basically saying, if you weren't so worried right now, what would you want to be doing? If worry wasn't in charge right now, what would you rather be doing? And then get them back to doing whatever it is they want to be doing. So they're not only engaged in work. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then just always reinforce their efforts of being courageous, even if it's a small sort of courage challenge or that sort of thing. Just always reinforcing and reinforcing and reinforcing. Book, Bring Your Child From Anxiety, by Tarchansky. It's a huge, I mean, it's got so many different sort of exercises, tips, tricks. Like I said, the images that are presented today are from her book, and she has a lot of really, really good information. And you don't have to read it cover to cover. It's just going to give you a lot of different tips for dealing with anxiety, also at different ages. And it gets really specific about phobias, things like that, which I think is helpful. I like this series of what to do when you worry too much. These are just kids' workbooks. She's done a bunch of those. She's done ones on anger. She's done ones on anxiety. It's just a child's workbook that I think is really good about overcoming anxiety, and has a lot of things that we're talking about. It talks more about like your worry monster. How do you tame your worry monster is sort of her metaphor. How are we doing on time?
Oh, I'm not
Are we
sure.
okay?
I think we are. Yeah, nice work. So I was just going to throw out, I think that the questions are excellent and important. And I was noticing, with a parent in my office the other day, that they were armed well with the tools, but of course, right in that moment, we had a child in an acute panic attack. And so I do think what's so important is to recognize that when your child is in that amygdala state is not the time to start the question. That you need to get them out of it first. And one thing, what I did with this family is I noticed the mom was starting to ask some questions, and I said, hey, before we do that, let's go ahead, let's take worry outside for a minute or two. We walked out, and we have this big patch of rocks, by my house. I said, Joe, will you go ahead and pick the smoothest rock for me while we're bringing worry outside, while we're bringing anxiety outside. And it just took really just a minute or two of again, that opposite emotion, a different task, something, spatial, physical. And then the questions worked, but the questions were not about to work in that moment when it was, even though the questions were right on point.
Right.
So I think we have to recognize when to pause before asking the question, when to, when to identify when your child is in that fight, flight, or freeze response, and act there first to get them into that space where they can even hear the question.
Yeah, get them to upstairs brain first and make sure that they're all in a more open, kind of mind, state of mind. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks. That's a good point. Other questions?
And then one more quick one I had too was, I think anxiety with older kids is very often accompanied with shame about being anxious about that particular thing.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, there's a message socially that you're not supposed to have whatever. You're not supposed to have nightmares anymore when you're in 5th grade, or
Right.
you're not
You should be able to have sleepovers.
Right, you're not supposed to be afraid of a haunted house by this point because you know it's not real. And so I think that can be a tricky, would you agree? That's a tricky
totally
obstacle to
agree.
get past first, is releasing the fact that they shouldn't have that.
Yeah. And that's where I think the brain stuff is helpful in terms of what it is or what's on board and why that's happening and how to help them sort of. And I think with older kids, I think it's also to your point, I think depersonalizing anxiety is really important. What I mean by that is, I think it's better to talk to kids about their anxiety first by talking about another person instead of talking about them directly. So it's kind of like, if your friend Johnny was anxious about writing, and your child's favorite thing is skiing. If your his favorite thing is skiing, if your friend Johnny was scared to ride a chairlift, what would you tell him? How would you help him get on the chairlift? Yeah, I think it's helpful with older kids to sort of help them sort of depersonalize a little bit and talk about sort of something else and then come back to their own.
What a totally different anxiety that they don't have.
Right, an anxiety that they don't have, so they can try it on and say, even that mindset of, oh yeah, I'm not anxious about that, but someone else is, it's again this thinking about thinking thing. Idiot.
Any other questions, everybody?
I just have one quick thing. What about a child who has successfully done things time after time again? They give her a little bit of worry, doesn't want to do it again. I'm finished with that, I don't want to do it again.
Can you give me an example?
Like, my daughter's gone to camp for 3 years.
Yeah.
And it's been sleepaway. She has a ball. She loves her counselors, everything she does there, but I'm not going back. And it's because she feels like we abandon her at camp. And so we talk about it, and she's just, I'm not going to force her to go if it's going to create this huge anxiety, but I'm also fearful that if we set the precedent that, okay, you've tried it, you don't like it, you don't ever have to do it again. So I'm sort of caught with, what do you do?
Right. So did this come up every year with her?
Pretty much.
And how did you handle it in the past?
Well, just because we both were working, we're like, you gotta go, honey.
I bet she had a blast. So I wonder if it's the actual camp or the sort of build up to kind of.
It's the build up. It's like getting a shot, and I have that same thing. It's like I can't tell her.
The anticipatory kind of.
Yeah, and I think because once she gets there, she's okay. The letters we get are fine. It's just the idea.
And if you fact check with her, like we talked about, in terms of the camp, does it helps her or she stays stuck? What do you think?
She stays stuck. And I think, some of it's her personality. She is quite stubborn, and so those thoughts are going to stay in her head.
Could you not ask her what she thinks could work to make it work?
Not
Does she have
going.
any thoughts about?
Well, if not going is not, that's a hard one. If not, let's take it off the table for now. If not going is not an option, what will help?
If not going is not an option, what will help?
Yeah.
Is it because it's so far away?
Oh, we're there.
Oh yeah, you guys are out there.
Yeah, it would be to her. I mean, the question to her.
I don't know if it's not going, it wasn't an option the last 2 years.
Yeah,
She
now.
voluntarily wanted to go when she was 8 and do it for 10 days, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I don't want her going away, but she wanted to do it, so I was like, okay, go for it.
I tried to close her can. I don't know if that.
It's the distance.
Is
is it possible to take her there ahead of time and just like walk around when it's not in session and just remind her of all the, you know, kind of make her comfortable again with the space?
So if she's stubborn, it's kind of like, you know, can she identify like been saying what's playing tricks on her here? What's the resistance really about? Something's playing tricks because we know by the fact she's already gone to camp. She's already done camp.
She just misses us. That's what she'll say. She misses us too much.
She identified and voiced her concern about the abandonment issue. So I feel like it's more, the camp is kind of just, you know, the way to express the feeling. That's really at the root of what she's thinking.
Maybe it's the few days that she does miss you, that, or those times that she just remembers. Because I know our son, we left him at the camp, well, with his grandmother.
You abandoned him.
We were there,
No,
we
you
left.
left him for sure.
But he remembers those times of being sad.
Right.
And calling us.
Right.
You know. But then he wants to go back this year for the same amount of time, even though we can't. So.
And those times may outcompete the sort of remembering the positive.
Yeah.
times.
So it's bringing up all the times that she loved, all those memories, and then saying, well, we're going to still be here.
Yeah, we've done all
We're
that.
right here,
and
you
it's
do
just-
the same thing, you love it.
Outcompete it.
I don't, yeah.
Because I think sometimes those negative memories can, you know, we know they can be louder sometimes, right?
Mhm.
And stick in our minds a little bit more than sort of the mundane, positive stuff where we're going along and doing great.
Exactly. All the day-long fun activities that she's doing all day that she loves, but then those 15 minutes before bed.
Bedtime.
Like,
Yeah.
How do you know if the child can really identify with the term being fearful? Like, do they really, or is it kind of, could it be a control thing, like, you know, I'm going to act this way so that my parents.
Well, I'm kind of looking at that. I'm trying to say, you know, is it true that she's afraid? Is she really afraid of camp? I don't know if she's really afraid of camp. Yeah, I mean.
How do you know she's not, I don't mean to say that she's playing you, but, you know, when you talk about emotions, that's one thing, but then, I don't know.
And part of it's knowing, I mean, I don't want to sort of dismiss the parental intuition part of knowing what works for your child. We've all been in situations where your child says, I don't want to go, and you say, yeah, you're going to go, and you'll get there, and you'll go, it's fine. You know what I mean? And you sort of put them through it, and then they're like, that was a blast, like, I don't want to ride the roller coaster, and they're like, oh, and then they ride 100 times, right?
Right.
So it's sort of, and you have that confidence. It's like this is nothing you don't have faith in. You're kind of like, once she gets there, I know she'll be fine. It's just whatever the struggle is at the moment.
It's just the fear that you're, you know, damaging your kid, you know, you're sending them off and.
Well, if I could just add something to that,
Yeah.
is that, you know, I think that there's, someone pointed out it's a lot harder to be a parent today. There's more pressures, more anxiety in general, and as a result, our response often is that we want to make everything right. Okay, so in this situation or other situations, I think sometimes it's okay for our kids to be uncomfortable. It's okay for our kids to learn that they can cope with their uncomfortableness and not have us get into the cycle with them. So at some point you decide they're going to go, you know in your head it's safe, and say, you know, I understand you don't want to go. We've made the decision you're going to go, and we're confident you'll be okay. I understand you think you're not going to enjoy it as much as you would like. But that's a decision, and if they're unhappy about it, it's okay for your kids to be unhappy at times. It's okay for your kids to have some degree of uncomfortableness. Now, anxiety, as you described it in the beginning of the talk, is not the same as uncomfortableness about a desire not to go. So you're dealing with that, and so I think I see too often it's okay for our kids to, in fact, struggle, and they will, in fact, emerge well with that. And actually, they're knowing that we think they can handle things is one of the ways they develop a degree of resilience and autonomy. So again, they don't always have to be happy with our decisions. If at the end you decide whether this decision or other decisions is the decision you're going to go with, you're the parent, and you decide that there is not huge danger in this to your child, it's okay if they don't want to necessarily do what you decided.
Right.
Well, and missing your family or missing somebody is a total natural emotion.
Yeah.
So it's okay to feel that way and to.
And certainly probably won't be the last time she
Exactly.
is away and misses her family.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that.
So we're getting you ready for college.
You're gonna go to college across the country.
Not bring up college anxiety at this rise.
But yeah, I think that speaks to how you know when it's, when it's a transitional anxiety, when it's something that is manageable and that will pass at some point, and how do you know? And it is hard to know because you don't want to do damage as a parent. And I understand that quandary, and I do think it's hard to sort that out. And I do think, to Alan's point too, I think a lot of kids also do need to hear things like, you can be uncomfortable, you can be nervous, and you can be brave at the same time. You can feel, I do that a lot with tests. You can feel nervous, and you can have courage to sit down. And this idea that kids do sometimes need to hear that along with the uncomfortable feelings, they can have access to something else. Like I use especially courage and bravery a lot, and that tends to at least allow them to see, oh, there's more than just this emotion. There's also, I could have this other piece of me, which is courage. Wow, that feels kind of good too, and that I can have them both at the same time, and I can hold those two things at the same time, as in, you don't just have to be nervous or feel great. You can actually feel a couple different emotions. That tends to sometimes be helpful.
And it builds resilience. I mean, what I like is that each time she goes, she comes home and she realizes, I'm okay, I had a great time. Maybe I don't want to go back, but each time she does, hopefully that resilience, that's the key, I think, for a lot of what we do as parents, is just trying to help them build some resilience. That even though there are things you don't want to do and you're going to be anxious about it, there's kind of that achievement at the end that, yes, I did it.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.